¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Kan du norsk?
If you've had that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Welcome to Mind Love Premium, episode 89. Today's episode is all about navigating romantic relationships when you have anxiety, OCD, and/or depression.
And one of the ways that we extend our pain is by doing a lot of what if thinking, right? Going backwards and saying, what if I had said this instead of that? What if we had met then instead of then? You know, like trying to solve this problem of like, what if? And that is exhausting and also impossible. You'll never know that for sure because you cannot go back in time. And so it's really helpful for me is to say, I wish this wasn't my reality, but it is, and accepting that this is my reality. What do I do now?
It's a new day, a new episode, and a new opportunity to subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you always know about new episodes. Plus, it makes you one of my favorite people. Because the more subscribers I have, the more I attract amazing guests to help better serve you. So don't forget to subscribe. Cultivating a healthy relationship can be hard enough. It almost necessitates self-growth because you have to learn to manage your triggers, communicate, consider someone else's needs besides your own, and hardest of all, probably have to share a closet. Dear God. But what if you also struggle with mental health issues like depression, anxiety, OCD, bipolar, or a spicy little cocktail of several together? Mental health issues can distort your perception. If you experience anxiety, a social event can feel like impending doom. Depression can create a mental filter that singles out only the bad events. It's hard to see things as they really are because the way we feel has such an effect on the way we experience it. Now bring in a relationship, and those distorted perceptions can make it really difficult to share a reality with someone. Because what do? If your partner has none of these struggles, do you meet in the middle? Your partner has to get a little closer to anxiety or depression or obsessive compulsion? That usually sounds fair, but is it in this case? Or do you try as hard as you can to meet them where they are? What would that even look like? Pretending you don't feel the way you do? Hoping if you spend a little more time with them, their emotional stability will rub off? Which maybe it will, but is that sustainable? Or even possible long-term? My guess is there's a little possibility in those options. But both of those strategies are just a little too simplistic to be realistic. Truthfully, I think a healthy relationship between one or more people that struggle with mental health is gonna take a lot of work. But guess what? I think a healthy relationship between any two people is gonna take a lot of work. In both cases, the absolute best way to have a positive relationship is to first know yourself well. It is so helpful if you know your triggers and your tendencies and your wounds. Otherwise, we tend to get all riled up, don't realize where it's coming from, and then ascribe blame to whatever does make sense to us. And that's regardless of if we struggle with our mental health on a daily basis. But when your mental health is also a factor, your triggers or habits or wounds can be magnified. It is so important to have a partner that you can communicate with so he or she can understand your unique needs. But here's the thing. All relationships require that. As scary as it sounds to be this vulnerable, look on the bright side. It seems more people than not these days struggle with their mental health. So you're not alone. And just know that those normies out there feeling all stable and peaceful are the minority. So today we're going to walk you through it so that you feel confident navigating relationships from that scary initial conversation to the day-to-day challenges. And our guest is Allison Raskin. She's a New York Times bestselling author, actress, director, and co-creator of the YouTube comedy channel and podcast, Just Between Us. She's also the author of Overthinking About You. So 3 key things we will learn are how mental health can impact power dynamics in relationships, navigating what's you and what's your disorder, and how to talk about mental health with your partner. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Allison Raskin to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I usually like to ask what got people interested in this topic that they're now devoting so much energy to, but I feel like I know the answer. So what got you interested in understanding how to navigate relationships dealing with mental health issues like OCD, depression, and anxiety?
I was really bad at it. I just, struggled to date in a healthy way for years and years. And it was, such a trigger for my mental health. And then, a few years ago, I sort of noticed that there was this shift in how I was, participating in relationships and how I viewed all of it. And I thought, oh, well, this is interesting and potentially helpful for me to share with other people.
Yeah, I could relate to a lot of the things. And I don't even know if it was one of those things. It's just, I feel like sometimes relationships, especially relationships that looking back were not a good fit for me, brought out depression and anxiety. It's like lying there dormant and the right conditions, and all of a sudden I'm like calling 100 times in a row.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about relationships is like, even if you don't struggle with mental health disorders, it is still a really emotional part of your life because it is like where you're asked to be your most vulnerable, where you're kind of giving control over your life to someone else, where, they can really hurt you. They can kind of disrupt like the lifestyle that you've set up for yourself and like the future you're planning on. And so I think, one of the exciting feedbacks from the book has been that like a lot of it's been helpful for people who don't even, historically struggle with their mental health, just because navigating these relationships in general is so tricky and emotional.
Yeah, I think this book should be given to every teenager that starts to date because I mean, if you're anything like me, I had no handle on my mental health. And it was funny because just the other day, to be clear, I've dealt with depression and anxiety, not OCD, but definitely describes my mother a little bit. But the other day, I was in a situation where I didn't even realize that things were piling up, really. My dog died, who was like the original love of my life that I've had for 15 years. That was like, honestly, one of the hardest things I've gone through, and I've gone through a lot of things. And but that was like a week and a half behind, and then like my childcare canceled. Like it was like 4 different things that all on their own, except for the dog part, were smaller things. But then something happened with my husband, and I could feel that urge to just call over and over again when he wasn't answering. I actually texted one of my best friends, Brett, and she was like, I was like, okay, I have that nervous, like, teenage energy where I want to call over and over again, like when you think your boyfriend's cheating or something, only I know that my husband is just in a work meeting, and I don't know. It was like, talk me off this ledge. But there are so many ways that our own imbalances, whether it's an actual mental health issue or maybe even just overwhelm, gets in the way of our relationships. What are some of the ways that relationships are impacted, especially through mental health issues?
I think it's such a broad spectrum, but one of the things that stands out is a lot of times people are struggling just mentally due to a variety of reasons in their life. Maybe they they are going through a tough time at work. Maybe they just like happen to be having a depressive episode, all these things. But without being able to communicate that to your partner, if you seem different or if you seem off, a lot of times the partner will think that, oh, they're not happy with me anymore, or, oh, this is because of a reflection of our relationship. And so one of the things I really talk about in the book is the importance of like letting your partner know when it has nothing to do with them. When like you're just having an anxious day, because sometimes you have anxious days. And that doesn't mean that you're not happy. That doesn't mean you don't want to be in the relationship. And so really being able to say like, this is how my, symptoms manifest for me. And I can assure you that even though I seem a little different or I'm going through a hard time, it is not because of us. And sometimes it is because of the relationship, right? And so then it's equally important to be able to say, like, I'm not getting what I need from you right now, because I think there's sort of this myth out there that if you find the quote unquote right person, which is something I don't even believe in, but that they will instinctively know how to help you. They'll instinctively know how to show up for you and support you in the way that you want. But why do we think that? Like people are so different. We come from such different backgrounds. We have such different needs and wants. And so being able to express to your partner like, hey, I'm really stressed out today. I'm having a really anxious day. And, the example I love to give is like, so what you can do to help me is to take care of dinner, right? Because the idea of like me having to figure out what we're eating tonight is just going to be, the thing that tips me overboard. But if you don't share that, then maybe your partner will know that you're having a tough day, but they'll come home with flowers instead. And you'll be like, flowers? I need dinner,
Like, so who's going to put these in a vase?
Exactly.
Giving me more work.
Because maybe for them, they on a hard day would want flowers or would want, but like we're all so different. And so really learning how your brain works so that one, you understand yourself better, but two, so that you can relay that to your partner so that they can be a better partner for you instead of thinking that they should just know, because that's so unfair to expect of other people.
The key part that I am hearing is learning how your brain works, because being able to communicate that takes a level of self-awareness that it took me years to develop. And there's still moments where I might lash out and then I take a step back and I'm like, okay, this isn't about you. Please just give me grace and let that slide and pretend I never said it, or even understanding what those feelings are, because I used to not realize that the root was inside of me. It was like the root was, it's not my fault I feel this way. It's all of these external circumstances. It's that you, for some reason, can't seem to understand that the rectangular Tupperware is in one pile and the square Tupperware is in the other pile. Like, this is your fault that I'm feeling this way. So, yeah, that understanding of like, okay, how does my anxiety or my depression manifest and what do I need in those moments? And if you can figure those things out, not only is it going to help you communicate it to your partner better, but that's when you become your own best friend, because you know what you need in a moment. You can give it to yourself in the moment without having expectations that somebody else is going to come solve your problems. But then I guess the question becomes, in the moment, when we're feeling these things, we tend to go into like fight or flight and we're not thinking quite as critically. So how do you get down to the root of the issue or talk yourself through it in emotional moments so that you can get to the place of better communication?
I use humor a lot in all areas of my life. And so when I am in a bad mood, I will like announce I'm in a bad mood, in sort of this like way that is like both self-aware, but also sort of joking. And, it makes it so that like my partner can poke fun at the bad mood instead of having to tiptoe around the bad mood, right? Because it's like right out there. It's like me announcing I'm grumpy today or I'm about to have a breakdown, like, and then we can sort of like, it doesn't become this thing that like we can't talk about, or that like, I know that I'm in control of myself. I try to hold myself to a certain standard of that, like I'm in charge of my own mental health. I'm in charge of taking care of myself. And then my partner is there to help me along the way, but it's not their job to fix me. And so really taking ownership over the times when I'm like not feeling great, and sometimes joking about it, sometimes just being really blunt about it. And then feeling like I don't have to hide that, alleviates so much of the stress around it, right? So like we don't need to hide the fact that like I'm doing a lot of OCD compulsions because we just were on an airplane. Like, oh, I'm doing my OCD compulsions because we're on the airplane. I'm going to prepare you that I'm going to be, like that airplanes are really triggering for me. I'm going to prepare you that like for about an hour, you're going to lose regular Allison and you're going to get OCD Allison and like, and then he knows what to expect. And so I think that the more openly that we talk about all of these things and the more used to it that we get, then it's not like this thing that is like burning inside of us and then suddenly we explode with something that we wish we could take back.
I handle that pretty similarly. A sentence that is heard in our home at least once a month is, I feel 5 today, treat me as such. I just go into like little kid mode. But one of the things I was inspired by that you do is a little game you play called Fact versus Thought.
Yes.
Can you walk us through that?
This episode is brought to you by Etsy.
Oh.
Hear that?
Okay. Thank you.
Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting. Well, not the ones you're hoping for. You want squeals of delight. Happy tears.
How did you?
And spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, the song needs a bit of work, but anyway, to get those reactions, make sure everyone on your list feels heard with handmade, handpicked, and designed gifts from small shops on Etsy. Gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, cozy style items, vintage pieces, and home decor to celebrate all of your favorite people and their specific kind of special. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
One of the things I was inspired by that you do is a little game you play called Fact versus Thought.
Yes.
Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so one of the things that's so strange about our thoughts is that they seem so important to us, but they're really not. They're just sort of thoughts that we have, and we do not need to treat them as fact because they're two totally different things. So a way to sort of like determine if you're, maybe viewing things in a way that is unhelpful based on just a thought is to really piece apart, is this a fact that I should treat as the truth, or is this just a thought, right? So like a thought would be, I'm never going to love anyone again, following a breakup, right? And you might believe that. But then you have to step back and go, how do I know that? Like, that's an assumption about the future. I have no idea what the future holds. I have no idea if I'm going to love anyone again. So to decide that my thought is a fact is like doing me a disservice. Whereas a fact would be, I really miss my ex, right? Like, that is a fact. But I will never meet anyone as good as my ex again. That is just a thought. And so it shouldn't be given the same weight as a fact.
Yeah, that makes total sense because sometimes we start with the facts and we don't even realize when we've crossed over into just thoughts. And so we're like, no, all of this is a fact because I know what my first sentence was. And before we know it, we're like doing whatever we can to show up. Maybe our ex is still sharing their location with us and suddenly we show up on their blind date. We're like, nah, the thoughts did not leave me into the lane of success here. So what do you think has been more difficult dealing with mental health issues in relationships? Has it been the breakups or actually maintaining a healthy, stable relationship?
That's a great question. I think it's, they're different, right? So I think breakups are really tough because they play at our insecurities, they play at our fears, they play at a lot of like catastrophizing and assumptions. And if you have some schemas about the world that aren't really helpful, then it's really easy to go down a really dark path following a breakup. So I'd say like my worst lows have been following a breakup, but then the day-to-day of a relationship is really difficult too. And that's really navigating more like my mental health is still a thing. Even if I'm in this healthy relationship, I'm still going to have good times and bad times. Our mental health journey is not linear. And also like dealing with hardships as a couple versus just being able to take care of yourself in that moment, but also kind of needing to show up for your partner too. All that stuff is really difficult. And so I think just like remembering that the work, unfortunately doesn't end. I think sometimes there's this sense of like, oh, now I'm in the relationship, I can relax. But like you can definitely, and it is different than, being heartbroken or on the hunt for someone, but there is still a lot of work and care that needs to be done, both in tending to the health of the relationship, but also in continuing to tend to your own mental health.
When I have gone through breakups, my human desire is always like, okay, find someone new so I can replace this so there's not such a feeling of loss. I'm actually feeling something similar with the loss of my dog. It doesn't really make sense for our family to get a dog right now, especially since we might have another baby in the next year or so. But I'm like, maybe if I just get a new one, I won't have to feel this loss anymore. But I know, like my higher self knows that if I allow myself time to get over that initial feeling of loss, the grief, whatever, I'm going to go into a new relationship from a better place, because I found that a lot of times when I jump too quickly, I end up carrying over a lot of the negative patterns from the last relationship that may have even been some of the things that led to the breakup, because I'm still like, I've got all these neural pathways, like do this when this sensory input is there. So that's what works for me. But what have you found has helped you handle breakups better?
So first of all, I will say I'm so sorry about your dog. I can't even imagine. And I'm such a huge proponent of always having a dog. So I think you should get another one. But
okay, I gotta go because I need to go look on Pet Finder.
I think that's like a totally different thing, and you should get another dog tomorrow. But one of the really important things with handling a breakup is I always talk about that there's two big things you're dealing with. One is the grief. One is like, I've lost this important person in my life. I'm feeling the loss. It is often like a death. They're still out there, but in a way they're choosing not to be with you, even though they are still alive. And that can sometimes be more painful. And then the other is rejection, right? It's like the sting and the hurt of rejection. And that is the place that I don't find to be helpful to stay in. I think it's really important to focus on the grief and to honor the grief, but to not tear yourself down due to the rejection, right? Because a lot of times our brains will tell us like, this person rejected me, this relationship didn't work out. That means I am a piece of shit. That means that I am worthless. That means that I will never find love again. Like, again, these leaps of logic. And so instead, stepping in and saying, all this means is that I wasn't compatible with one other person on a planet of billions of people. That still sucks. It still hurts. I still need to grieve this, but it doesn't really mean anything other than that. And that can be really helpful. I mean, there's obviously always things to learn from a relationship, but look, sometimes like people just leave and it's not your fault, and it's not a big reckoning of what you need to change in your next relationship. It's just life. And so really focusing on like, this is painful and I am in touch with this pain, but I also know that this pain will not last forever. And one of the ways that we extend our pain is by doing a lot of what if thinking, right? Going backwards and saying, what if I had said this instead of that? What if we had met then instead of then? What if I had, what if this thing had happened instead of this thing? Like trying to solve this problem of like, what if? And that is exhausting and also impossible, right? Because you can't go back and undo the things that you did. And you'll also never know, right? Yeah, maybe in an alternate universe or a different dimension, if you had said this instead of that, you guys would still be together. But guess what? You'll never know that for sure because you cannot go back in time. And so it's really helpful for me, heartbreak is to say, I wish this wasn't my reality, but it is, and accepting that this is my reality. What do I do now? Instead of fixating in what could have been.
That's so helpful. And I love the tip about being okay with like actually being in the grief and processing it. So I know I keep bringing up my dog, but it's still very recent.
Yeah, of course.
And I had a lot of grief. And man, those first 3 days, I was crying more than I was not crying. Yeah. And it was interesting because it was just a few weeks before where I was saying to somebody, I did an episode on grief, and I was like, I'm really interested to see the next time I deal with grief because I have so many more tools to handle it. But oh my God, it does not make it any easier. At least, well, maybe. It doesn't make the feelings any easier, but I feel like I moved through it faster than I have in the past, because in the past I was numbing out a lot of the feelings and not allowing myself to actually feel, which means I wasn't processing any of them. They were just sitting there. And so regardless of what you're grieving over, sitting there and just feeling it allows that energy to move through you so that you're not just carrying it around with you wherever you go to your next Tinder date or whatever. So I highly recommend processing that, and which really just means sitting there long enough to decide what to do with it. Like, what is the meaning behind this grief for you? What are you going to take with you from it? What have you learned from it? How is this showing you what you want in your next relationship? I think in breakups, you can find a lot of clarity towards what works for you and what doesn't. And if you actually have the self-worth to believe that you deserve that, it can make a really huge difference. And it reminds me of something else you talk about, how one of the hardest parts of living with anxiety, OCD, or depression is figuring out who you really are underneath all the bullshit. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I think this is something that's sort of up for discussion in the mental health field. But for me, it has always really helped me to externalize my disorders, to not, view myself as an anxious person, but I'm somebody who lives with anxiety, and like these things sound like semantics, but I would never say I'm so OCD. I'd say I have OCD. And so externalizing these things outside of me as something that I live with and deal with, maybe the way you would a physical illness that doesn't define your personality, being able to say like, oh, I actually, this is not me, and I am different from these disorders. And therefore, let me try to get in touch with the real me as much as possible. Let me enjoy those moments where they don't have as much control over my life. And, a real important moment for me was, going back on medication a few years ago. And that was really like me getting in touch with myself, because I think I used to think I was like this really uptight, controlling person. And now I realize like, no, I'm not. Allison isn't. My anxiety likes me to be. But like my core self, like I don't really care that much about a lot of stuff. Like I'm pretty easygoing. Like I just get anxiety sometimes that makes me feel like I'm not. But in moments where I'm not anxious, I'm actually like incredibly kind of easygoing and like, whatever you want to do, fine, no problem. Like these kind of like, I like to call it kind of like the younger sibling things of like, oh, you want to do something with me? I don't care what we're doing. Let's just go do it, like. And so it was really lovely for me to sort of like find myself beneath these disorders. Not everybody feels that way. For some people, like, and especially with different disorders, that's not how they view it. They view them as the same. Like, but this is just like the way that works for me, is to really externalize them.
Yeah, and I can relate to that. I had an eating disorder for a long time, and like you said, it's navigating what works for you. Do the semantics matter to you? Try on some things and really touch in and see if it feels any different when you talk about it, or even when you have a new experience, if you talk about it differently. One of the examples that I found that works for me that might even be different from you is there was a time where when I was really working on consciously healing from my eating disorder, I'd healed a lot of the behaviors, but I still saw myself through them. Mm-hmm. And I stopped calling it my eating disorder and just started saying that eating disorder. Yes. And I was like externalizing. You saw me even do the arm movement, like it's over there. And so since then, I have dealt with different moments or periods of depression and anxiety. And I don't know if it makes a huge difference, but there's something about it where when I catch myself saying my anxiety, my depression, I'm like, oh yeah, anxiety is popping up, like just anxiety. So then it's just this thing. It's not this thing that makes me different or me off. I am not the disorder. It's just every now and then the disorder decides to visit. And there's just something about that where it makes me feel like, well, if it just came to visit, then I can let it see its way out. And I'm not saying that it's always that easy whatsoever, but for me, there's something about the mindset of it being that easy that makes it more manageable to deal with.
Totally. And even just like recognizing that these things come and go is so powerful, right? Because when you're younger and experiencing it and you don't yet have the evidence that they do come and go, it can be so scary and so overwhelming. But to be able to say like, oh, I'm having a bad day, but maybe tomorrow will be different. And if not tomorrow, maybe next week, that's something that just this perspective of living longer can really help with.
So we've talked about breakups. Let's move into actually navigating being in a healthy relationship while having any of these mental disorders or even just a tendency towards behaviors. You talk about how anxiety can be broken down into 3 types when romantic relationships are involved. How have you found that they manifest? You talk about how anxiety can be broken down into 3 types when romantic relationships are involved. How have you found that they manifest?
Yeah, so psychologist Robin Gibbs was sort of breaking this down for me. And of course, anytime that you talk about mental health with and there's only 3 things, people will react badly. And obviously everything is very nuanced and complicated. But just for the idea of keeping things somewhat simple, she was talking about that there's, general anxiety, which means that you are just a person who deals with anxiety in your life. And therefore, it's likely that you will also deal with anxiety in your relationship because guess what? You're an anxious person. And so it's going to show up kind of in all areas of your life. Then there's anxiety that is more related just to intimacy. So that kind of gets into maybe people with different attachment styles, different attachment wounds. So maybe you're not that anxious of a person, but as soon as you get close to somebody, your anxiety rears its head. And that's maybe a signal that it is more an anxiety tied to intimacy. And then the third she calls your wisdom. And I love that because it is basically when anxiety isn't something that is all bad, right? There's a reason why as humans we have anxiety, and it is to keep us safe from danger. And so sometimes your wisdom, you're feeling anxious because it's your wisdom telling you that things actually aren't okay and that this maybe isn't the right fit for you. And so obviously what's really tricky is sort of navigating between all of those things and being able to figure out which is which and when is it actually your wisdom. And so that's when I kind of talk about what are valid concerns, if you have valid concerns, then that's probably not just you being an anxious person, but it's something that you should probably bring to your partner and see how they respond to it. Because I think one of the pitfalls of all of us being much more open to our mental health and having language to talk about it and things is sometimes we think that we're the problem when in reality it is an actual problem in the relationship. And so a big way to be able to distinguish is is this something you can actually bring to your partner's attention and they can do something about it, right? So bringing to their attention, hey, I don't like it when you don't call me back. That makes me feel bad. And maybe you have a communication style where you don't need to talk that often. But for me, I feel pretty disrespected and ignored if you don't call me back within an hour or 2. And then you see what happens, right? They either go, that's totally understandable, and therefore I will adopt my communication in this way so that you can feel safe and happy in this relationship. It's not what I need, but I recognize it's what you need, and therefore I'll do it. Or they can say, ugh, that's ridiculous. Why do you need that? I'm not going to do that. You just need to deal with this worry on your own. Not a great dynamic, right? That's pretty revealing. Sometimes it's not even the problems in the relationship that are as revealing as how the person deals with it when you bring them up, right? Because like I said, we're not all instinctively going to know how to be there for each other, but you need that willingness. You need that partner that's willing to hear what you have to say and willing to adapt, to a certain degree to what it is that you're saying you need. But then there's things where it's oh, I'm really worried that in 30 years we won't have anything to say to each other. Right? You bring that to your partner. what are they going to do with that? It's not 30 years from now. They have no idea. Like, they can say, well, I hope that we'll have something to talk about. But right, like it's not really a tangible issue that they can address. And so that might just be more, either like relationship anxiety, general anxiety. And that's something that like maybe you don't need to pay as much attention to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you can buy table topics. Everyone has something to talk about with table topics.
Right.
But, and with those communication styles, that person that you made up, the imaginary person that we're just talking about, that was like, no, you can deal with that worry on your own. That's not necessarily a terrible way to be, but it's not the right fit for somebody who needs that, Exactly. And so like, if you know that these are your triggers, there's a balance of working on your triggers and also understanding what you need. And that's the self-work that we all have to do individually to kind of navigate between. Because I don't want to bring my anxiousness or my depressive episodes to my husband, but I also need to be real with myself and understand where I am in my journey. And if being with somebody that seems to exacerbate those things versus wants to know me, wants to know how to be with me, wants to build a life with me, like those are two just very different energies rather than like, oh, just take me as I am. Like, I get that. That's all great. But anybody that's been in a long-term relationship knows, even in the beginning, if you feel like you fit together like a puzzle, there's going to be stuff that comes up in the future that you're going to need to learn how to communicate. So you're going to need that self-awareness and also the communication skills to bring that to somebody. And sometimes for me, the communication skills first involve doing a little practice with myself, whether it's stepping out of the room to take a deep breath so I can get more in tune with what's underneath all of the things manifesting on the top, because like we talked about earlier, a lot of times that thought game can lead us into these territories where we're focusing on things that aren't even real. So stepping away and kind of getting to the bottom of that. And I know that Dr. Robin, is what I'll call her, taught you some body work to help kind of get to that place. What does that entail?
I'm not as practiced or as skilled in the body work stuff. I know that works a lot for a lot of people. She talks a lot about grounding yourself, putting both feet on the floor, locating where the anxiety lives in your body. There's also, progressive muscle relaxation where you're sort of going through it's sort of this like step-by-step thing where you're going through how each part of your body feels. I believe that the big reason why this kind of thing works is like, if you're running from a tiger or like, right, like kind of when we feel like we're amped up, it's like, well, we're in danger. But if you start to breathe in and out in a really, elongated way, in a specific way, and if you kind of take a moment to take a deep breath to ground yourself, all of these things, then your body is sort of like, oh, I guess we're not running from a tiger, right? Because we have the time to do this sort of thing. Like it kind of regulates your nervous system. But I will say that for me personally, I actually don't do those exercises as much as maybe I should or could. And for me, a lot of ways that I calm down is more cognitive work, or I also a lot of times weed helps me with my anxiety. I'm also, medicated. So for everyone kind of finding out what works for them. But there are definitely some pretty easy breathing exercises that can sort of bring you back to like a more stable state when you're heightened. I mean, there's also people who will, put their face in ice water, sort of just to shock you out of the intense feelings that you're feeling. So there are like some really cool like tips and tricks that you can do physically to sort of regulate yourself emotionally.
Yeah, for me, weed definitely helps, like a good hybrid. Just
one
hit or a little drop of an edible, and I'm like, ooh, what problem? But the body work is super helpful for me, exactly the reasons that you said. And also, it's so easy to ruminate when you're in those states. And the moment that you're like, well, where in my body is my anxiety? Mm-hmm. Or where do I feel this tension? Or focusing on your breath, suddenly you're out of your mind and you're back into your body. And I remember one of the things that Dr. Robin had told you was like, you said, put your feet on the ground. But then even that is like feeling how stable that is. It sort of shifts your perspective to a broader perspective. Like, oh yeah, I'm not as unstable as I think. The ground is right beneath me. It's always supporting me. Those little things sound cheesy sometimes, but they really, really work in that moment because it's just like, oh, something to hold on to when everything else feels chaotic.
Totally.
There was another thing that you talked about, and it's like power dynamics in relationships. And I think this is such an important thing to bring up because I'm somebody who has experienced ADD and depression and anxiety, and I'm also very self-aware. And so there's a lot of previous relationships that I wasn't finding the people that were also like seekers and mental explorers and like any desire to be as self-aware at all. And so it was interesting because I'm thinking of one relationship in particular, and I was so often being like, well, trying to communicate, not as well as I do now, but still like, okay, well, I experienced this, so I would like this from you, or just kind of having a handle on it or like bringing it up so they know it wasn't the problem. And then it became this thing where it was like, oh, Melissa over here with all of the issues that I'm always having to work around. And this person seemed to like put himself on a pedestal, like he was issue free. And I'm like, bro, you are not issue free. You just have zero self-awareness about your issues. And I'm trying to show you the way. Clearly the relationship did not work out. But how do you experience, or how have you experienced power dynamics, and how do you look at finding a balance for that? Do you say that, oh, well, this is clearly uneven, this isn't the right relationship? Like, what do those power dynamics speak? How do they speak to you? I guess I'm asking.
So I think I've done it both ways, where I'm with somebody where I can't believe that I'm with them, that I feel so lucky, that I feel almost like I tricked them, right? And so what does that reveal? That reveals that at that time in my life, I didn't think I was worthy of this kind of relationship. I didn't think I was worthy of that type of person. And so doing a lot of work on yourself to both like learn to love yourself, but also learn to like yourself, so that like you can understand why anybody would want to be with you. Right? And I think we often view people as like, you know, even just like, oh, they're a 10, they're an 8, they're a not, like we kind of just like have this society where we think that people hold different values. But in reality, everyone has the same value just by the mere factor of being alive and being a human being. And so when you're like, oh, why are they with them? Why are they with her or him or them? And you go, oh, they're so mismatched. It's like, well, they're not mismatched if they both make each other happy, right? So just like tearing down these ideas of what is a match, what is a healthy relationship, you know, like, oh, this person makes a lot of money and this person's good looking, or why aren't they good looking if they make a lot of money? Like just being like, all that matters is that needs are being met and that partners are happy together. And so I think when you stop thinking, oh, I'm better than them or they're better than me, taking that away. And then also the key ingredient for me, like the secret sauce is mutual respect, right? Because like you can really like somebody, but you cannot respect them. And that to me is always kind of the kiss of death, right? So if like you think that they spend all of their time, like they've chosen to become like a painter, and you don't think they're a good painter, and you don't like respect them being a painter, that's going to cause a problem. You know, like you really need to check in with yourself that you respect this person, you respect the way that they spend their time, you respect their interests, and that will help you. That will set you up for a lot of success, instead of this thing of like, oh, well, if only I could change them. It's like you want to grow in a relationship, but if you're not happy with your starting point, then it's probably not a good match.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think exactly what you said, where when you're looking at other couples and you're like, wow, they're so mismatched. One of the things that was life-changing for me is realizing that the judgments that I put out towards other people are really the exact judgments that I am like hammering into myself.
Definitely.
And so an example of that is when I was healing from an eating disorder, there was so much body image that was wrapped up in that. And if I'm judging my own body, I'm clearly judging everybody else's. Like I just was. And it was too difficult for me at first to stop the self-judgment. Like it was just so wrapped up. I couldn't get to that place of self-worth yet at this point. And so what I started to do is just change the way I spoke about or thought about other people. The moment I'd be like walking down the street, and the moment I'd be like, how is she wearing that shirt with that body? Like, that's an example. And I know it sounds terrible. That was my old self. But I would think things like that. And it was really because I would put on a shirt and be like, I can't wear this with my body. And so then I'd look at other people and I'm like, technically that person's slightly bigger than me. And they have the audacity to wear that. That's clearly a rule in my universe, right? And so if you possibly practice on other people, when you notice yourself like thinking people are mismatched, find the amazing things about them. Like I set a challenge to actually pick 1 to 3 things that I thought was beautiful about the people walking by, about the people that I came in contact with. And it drastically changed the way first I saw other people, and then I saw myself. And now those things aren't even thoughts anymore. And I used to do that same thing with couples, and I forgot about it because it's been so long. But you're like giving these examples. I was like, oh my God, what happened to that version of me? I must have grown. So it's so important, because maybe if it's too difficult to see yourself in your relationship at that point now, try starting with other people and build a habit so that it's easier to turn inward.
I think also cutting yourself a break for having these thoughts in the first place. It's not like you were born with these thoughts. You were socially conditioned to think about the world in these ways, and it is really hard to unlearn something. So instead of being like, oh, why am I judging other people? It's like, of course I'm judging other people, but I don't want to anymore. So now I'm going to do the work to try to change that.
I love that. And realizing that you making that choice is also being on the forefront of creating new habits in society. I mean, we've seen so many changes around the way we talk about people, around the way we talk about bodies, looks, any of those things. Thank God. Have you revisited some of the things they've said about like teen pop stars in our days? It's like, no wonder I had an eating disorder. Like all those low-rise genes should be burned. But anyways, it kind of brings me to, how do we talk about these things with new partners, especially? Like, it seems so easy for me now. Something new comes up, and I'm like, well, you married this. You're already locked in. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about my discharge. Like, whatever. I can bring up anything. But in the newer relationships, that can be kind of difficult to breach without feeling like you're bringing, like highlighting your own flaws or something like that, or you're gonna scare the person away. So how do you recommend bringing up these things in a way that might be easier for you to deliver and maybe easier for your partner to receive?
So one of the big things is not just focusing on the content of the disclosure, like the facts, but also focusing on the energy of the disclosure, right? Because we pick up a lot on body language. And so if you just sort of like say things filled with anxiety, they're going to receive it pretty anxiously, right? You know, like thinking about like wanting to disclose this stuff in a way where you have some control over it, where you're not just compulsively sharing because you're afraid that they're going to reject you and you want to know sooner rather than later. But instead really making the conscious decision that like, I see the potential of us having a more, you know, substantial relationship. I want to see where this potential partnership goes. And therefore, I'm going to tell you more about myself so that you can get to know me better. Instead of, here are my problems and they will be your problems now too, right? Those are like two very different things.
It's like the sandwich. I see us going somewhere. Also, I have all of these things and you're going to get laid tonight.
But I think coming from a place of ownership where it's like, yes, I've dealt with these things. Yes, I'm dealing with these things, but I know that I'm in charge of them. And obviously there are some people where their mental health is in a place where they do need help and they can't, you know, be the one the only one dealing with it. But, hopefully if you're in a place where you're starting a new relationship, you're relatively stable enough where you can say like, yes, I've struggled with depression, but here's what I've done about it. Here's things I know that help me. Here's how I've gotten better. Sometimes it can be like the things that are really scary to share with someone is something that happened like a decade ago, and it's not really relevant to who you are today, but you're so afraid of just like the stigma and the baggage of it. But being able to say like that maybe 10 years ago, somebody shares that they did have a suicide attempt, but being like, but I've done a lot of work and growth since then. And honestly, I just feel, I feel for my younger self that they got to that place. That is such a different way to talk about it than like making it seem as though that's something that could happen to you again tomorrow. Because obviously we don't know what could happen again tomorrow, but just saying that like, I know this is something in my life that I need to address and I will continue to address it is like kind of a relief for your potential partner to hear.
There's probably people listening to this that are listening because their partner is the one that deals with anxiety, OCD, or depression. What have you found works and doesn't work as that support system?
It's going to be different for everybody, right? But I think something that doesn't work is being judgmental of someone's mental health problems, right? So being rude about it, making them feel guilty about it, saying that they should snap out of it, blaming them for having it. If you struggle with these things, everyone needs, but you especially need an empathetic partner. You need somebody whose first point of entry isn't judgment and being condescending, but is like, oh no, like how can this help? Or how can we help? But I also think a thing that can be harmful is being with somebody who feels like they need to fix you, who cannot handle the fact that you aren't doing well, and therefore it becomes this big burden on them to get you better. And that can sometimes cause real conflict in a relationship. Whereas being able to recognize, oh, my partner's not doing that well right now, but I trust them that they'll get out of this. Like, I'm here to help, but I trust that, like, they're going to figure this out or they're going to find what they need to do to get back to themselves. But it is not my responsibility to get them there.
That is so important because I think the biggest lesson I've learned with trying to fix people or having people try to fix me is that even if certain things are done that seem helpful, you kind of steal the lesson from that person. It's like, I need to create the neural pathways to learn how to get over my challenge. Like you can't just hand them to me. Maybe it works this time, but then next time I'm going to feel more dependent on you and then more dependent on you. And then if you break up with me because you can't handle this anymore, I'm going to feel like not only am I losing a lover, but I'm losing like the only person that made it possible for me to keep it together. So thank you so much for that. And really all of the teachings that you've brought to this episode, because I know that it does seem like depression, anxiety especially, are just getting more people are dealing with it. And I think it says something about just our society and kind of evolving with social media and like all of these stimulations and inputs. And so I don't know anybody who is free from this completely, whether it's themselves or a loved one. So for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and your book, where is the best place for them to connect?
Yeah, so Overthinking About You should be available wherever books are sold. And for international listeners, I know that the Strand bookstore ships internationally and has some signed copies. And then for more just me, I have a weekly podcast called Just Between Us, where we talk about a bunch of different topics, but often talk about mental health. And then I also am at Allison Raskin on Instagram and Twitter. And I have a mental health focused Instagram account and Substack, both called Emotional Support Lady. So that's sort of my mental health brand is Emotional Support Lady, if you want to look into that.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/x89. Your challenge for this week is something that everyone can do, whether you're the one that struggles with mental health or it's your partner, or neither of you do. And it's to enforce or communicate, I should say, a boundary. In order to do this, you have to know yourself. You have to understand what is your boundary first, which I think I was like 31 when I started to really realize what boundaries are and how they can help me. For some reason, this idea of boundaries always sounded harsh or something a really uptight person would have. But now I'm like, how did I live so long without any boundaries? And so one of my boundaries, for example, is energetic. I know that I get overwhelmed easily by large groups of people and that I need to take time for myself. I'm also an HSP, highly sensitive person, so lots of stimulation gets to me. I'm overstimulated really easily. And so there used to be times where I would think that I'm just all of a sudden irritable, that I can't stand the person in front of me. And really, I'd just realize, oh, well, my pants are rubbing me the wrong way. There's wind everywhere. There's a band playing over there, and my baby is grabbing my arm. I am overstimulated right now, and in those moments, I need to take time for myself. The game changer of understanding this wasn't just about applying it for myself, it was also communicating that with my partner. So we go to Michigan every single July for the whole month, and we stay with his family, and he's got a huge family whom I love. Well, the first few times that I visited, I would just feel off, and suddenly I couldn't feel like I could be myself. And so I would hide out, and I felt like I was doing something wrong, like I couldn't handle being a good partner or a good girlfriend at the time. And now I know that I just need to take a walk to kind of recharge my energy. And when I was able to share this with Shane, my husband, now he makes sure that I get that as well. He'll check in with me and ask me how I'm doing. And if I disappear for a minute, it's nothing offensive or I'm not trying to be antisocial. I'm just recharging so that I can come back as my best self. Both of us knowing that is vital because, yeah, it does seem kind of rude if I just disappear when we're all gathering at family time. Like, why can't I just hang out like everyone else? But like I said, this is just a boundary. This is just the way that I can show up as my best self, and I need it no matter who I'm around. So that's just one minor example of the way you can find a boundary and enforce it. Other ones can be about your triggers, can be about the way somebody speaks to you, can be about word choices that people use. There's so many ways to enforce your boundaries. So what I encourage this week is to first identify one, which is going to take a little self-reflection, and then communicate it in a loving way and see how that changes your experience of your relationship. And let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa or leave a comment right on the show notes page at mindlove.com/x89. If you'd love to support the show, the best way to do that is by joining Mind Love Premium at mindlove.com/premium. You can also join right in the Apple Podcasts app, although I'm going to say I do prefer my website. Premium members get over 50 exclusive episodes just for premium members. You also get bonus meditations, sometimes early release, and an ad-free listening experience. You can also support one of my amazing sponsors, and you can find all of them at mindlove.com/sponsors. Or you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you do, I just might read your review on the show. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next time.